Today, we're talking about football and, well, is it coming home? The question that I suppose everyone's asking in the wake of England's extraordinary triumph in the semi-final of the Euros, and they're playing Italy in the final on Sunday. I'm Iain Martin, editor of Reaction. I'm joined by Alastair Benn from the Reaction team, my colleague. I suppose the idea today, Alastair, is to talk as much about the culture or the cultural impact of what we think is happening, rather than the specifics of the football. I wouldn't really claim to be an expert on that, but something important seems to be happening. This is an important cultural moment when you consider that England have waited so long to get to a final of a major contest. And it's odd in itself, really. I always think, if you're French or German or Italian or Spanish, it's not surprising when you get to the final of a tournament. These are countries that are used to expecting it, but in England, there is this long tradition of disaster, and this almost this myth that's grown up of the country being jinxed. So this is a very positive story, isn't it?
Yeah, there's an obsessiveness in English football culture that is only matched by, I think, in Italy and in South America. If you think about France, there have been great stories around its football team. 98, the team of all the talents, a kind of multicultural awakening. To some extent, the same story was told at the last World Cup, with a kind of, multicultural patriotism they were trying to tell. But I come at this slightly as an outsider. Growing up in Scotland, I didn't really support Scotland because they didn't play in any major tournaments, but I always watched England playing in championships. So I'd say I'm looking in as an outsider on that kind of obsessive story of disaster, defeats, hubris as well. I think why this tournament is important, or probably a turning point, is pretty obvious given the parallels with Euro 96, which was in itself a very powerful moment in English culture, a moment which it sort of played out on lots of dimensions. It was the first period where football was really embraced in politics, and kind of sums up a moment where, if you look at films like The Class of '92 about the Manchester United team, Tony Blair is a talking head, talking about what that meant for his brand of politics. It was a real Blair, in his view, it was a Blairite story about working class achievements, meritocratic achievements, and he wanted to be part of, to get the reflected glory a little bit. And also 96, England played dashing football. It was exciting. Yeah. In this tournament, it started off in a very stolid way, but they have started playing in a fun, dashing way, scoring a lot of goals. And in the quarterfinal, dispatching Germany with relative ease, and then obviously the contrast as they've actually got through in the semi-final.
It's thrilling. It's thrilling. It's interesting what you're saying there about the politics of it, that because of course Euro 96, I was there for the Scotland versus England game, and I'm like you, I'm unusual in that I'm a Scotland fan, but I do always support England when they're not playing Scotland. And I do remember when I was growing up, it was different. Scotland always qualified for World Cups. 74, 78, 82, 86, 1990, we took it for granted that we'd be there. And Scotland had a great history connected to its industrial past as well, and working class culture of being this workshop that produced so many great footballers. But I think what was 96 was connected also to 1990, the Italia 1990 experience, where just before that, remember Hillsborough. So the Hillsborough disaster happens, and that really tops a pretty disastrous decade for English football in terms of hooliganism and appalling treatment of in the Hillsborough case, the appalling treatment of fans and a disaster inflicted on the paying public. So English football is at a low ebb by the time you get to 1990. There's then this rebirth, and it's a positive, optimistic story. There's tragedy at the end, and England should have won that competition. But it goes, and you're right, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, from that 89 horror of, or 89, 90 sort of horror period through 1990 reinvention, and then 96, politicians, as you say, start to cotton on to the idea that it's becoming a symbol of global Britain, for want of a better term, or globalization, or sort of fusing of the market and working class perspective, or classless perspective in Blair's interpretation. But in neither tournament, both cases England probably should have won, they don't win, and then it sets in train this really, I think, ultimately quite boring and destructive English obsession with the idea that they, and I say that as someone who does support England, as I said, but they are somehow conspired against by the fates and destined not to win a major tournament, because it should be absolutely standard, shouldn't it, considering England's size and clout as a footballing nation. England should be qualifying, or England should be reaching the final of a major tournament several times a decade and winning it. I mean, if you compare it to something like Germany, where, as I said earlier, they don't regard it as don't regard it as as unusual. It's kind of national right. What do you feel though about the attempts? It's really funny on social media the morning after when most people got a hangover, the attempts to claim it politically. It's quite interesting on the progressive. I mean, it's possible, isn't it? It's just politics doesn't really apply to this. It's just really exciting when England win, and everyone feels very upbeat and unified about it. Maybe there is no read across to progressive politics. I've seen various people on Twitter prominently claiming this symbolizes something about a sort of different generation of players and a progressive approach, and some people even saying it's a sort of end to the Brexit period. And there will be people on the other side, or there are, saying that it symbolizes something about English self-confidence post-Brexit. Maybe it's just about football.
Yeah, well, I think the comparison with 96 is probably quite helpful in trying to think about that, because yeah, you're right, it was a game they should have won against Germany, and it turned into this great narrative of, it's coming home and the fates are against us. But it is true, it did sort of sum up something. Why was Blair drawn to football? Euro 96 was clearly part of that. So there was something going on. And I think with the Euros this year, it's actually sort of more complicated to think about, because it's unfolding on a lot of dimensions. There's Boris's sort of bread and circuses thing, where we've kind of experienced the opening up of mass events through the prism of big sporting events, which are billed as trial events, where everyone, with a proof of the right paperwork, can go in and sit in a mass space, while we face we still face quite a lot of restrictions on gatherings in our usual social lives. And Adam Bolton wrote a great piece for Reaction a few weeks ago about the difference between the theatre world and the sports world at the moment. If you go to the theatre, it's like, you're shouted at for not taking off your mask to drink. It's, I really feel for people having to enforce these rules, because it's not their fault. They have to do it, and it's a completely different atmosphere. So there's that, but there's also, as you mentioned, the kind of narrative of Gareth Southgate as a kind of progressive patriot, and being the guy who sort of elaborated that in an open letter before the championship started, where he talks about kind of the essential experience of sport and how that links to the kind of his players' aspirations to champion equality and all these values. And to be quite frank, I'm really of the camp that by saying that sport has a degree of, that sportsmen don't have to be good people, and that the kind of normal morality that that me and you share when we work together or with friends is kind of suspended on the pitch. That's kind of part of the point of sport, as it is the point of great opera or theatre. There's a suspension of the rules, and that's why football is, as Maradona famously put it, is the game of deceit. It's about outwitting people. Why do the Argentines, they loved the hand of God, which was just cheating, and Maradona knew what he was doing, but they absolutely love that afterwards. And that's because, to a degree, the rules don't apply on the football field. It's not the same. That's not because they're a nation of people who love cheating or lying. That's not it at all. It's reveling in outwitting an opponent.
In the gamesmanship.
That is a value in itself. And football, and I'm not a huge football fan, but that's what I think of when I think about sport, is, the morality of sport is a bit like the morality of the novel. It's a kind of anything goes, rules suspension world, And I think with the football, these players are, with their immense style and skill, and the qualities like the defensive qualities of England at the moment, they're showing a particular impression of English life. They're everything that they've gone through in their backgrounds is driving them into that. It is a great story. I love the story of Raheem Sterling growing up, in the shadow of Wembley, and every one of those guys, top sportsman, has that. But then let's not be blinkered about it. Top sportsmen are super driven and competitive in all aspects of their lives, and that's not always pleasant, and it's not always a nice thing to see. So many great examples. Andrew Flintoff, who says he always struggles. He can't lose a game of chess to his son still because he's so competitive. Andy Murray, you just look at these guys, the anxiety they're going through, the relentlessness. These are kind of, this is not about being nice and championing certain social goals, but those are things.
I must say, exactly. I mean, I must say, during the Wimbledon experience, you did almost want to say to Murray, look, calm down. You've won Wimbledon twice. No one thought that was going to happen before it did. His achievement is enormous. Can't he just sort of take delight in the fact that he did well? But obviously, as you say, he's eaten up by the fact that he's at the end of his career and can't reach those heights that he reached as a young man. I suppose what is most inspiring, though, about the Southgate story, what I really like about it, and it's not political in any way, is that is the calmness he brings to it. Because one of the most annoying features of English football, to be frank, is just this belief that it's all about heart and passion, which some of his predecessors, not all of them, have displayed. Just this sense of kind of grit and playing for the shirt. And actually, he's very technocratic, very good at what he does. Last night, the game against Denmark was the perfect example of it, where, and it sounds trite, everyone was saying it, England had not conceded a goal and had not had to deal with adversity at all in the tournament. It had all been relatively straightforward. So there's a great mental test there, and a test of their resilience. What would happen when they went behind? And actually, his tactics, the way they stayed calm, they sort of dug in, and then his substitutions and the way the things were reordered was, and I hesitate to say it was un-English, but I just mean that it stands in contrast to what so many of his predecessors have done, sort of dashing up, just sort of dashing after games and getting increasingly desperate and then crashing out. So there's something really admirable just about his craft and the calmness, the way that he talks, and the way that he inspires the players. And because you look at the interviews afterwards with the players, and there's very little triumphalism. They're schooled in being as calm as possible about it and trying to manage expectations. And I think that's a thrilling, interesting departure in English life. Do you think they're going to win on Sunday? I mean, to me, it's not my area of expertise, but people whose views I trust on it say it's completely 50-50. I think it is very important for England
I think
that they win. I mean, for the country more generally, to just ditch that jinx obsession. It will change things quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, and it becomes just another sport in the same way as Anthony Murray and Wimbledon. It was a huge national obsession, and it clearly weighed on him for years. And the press coverage was crazy in the early years of his career. He was obviously the best tennis player in a long time. But yeah, I think it's also crucial they win for the sake of the stories that we'll tell, about this, and whether it becomes a great cultural turning point. Although Euro '96 obviously it mattered. Something like the Ashes in 2005, I think, is quite an interesting example of what did that mean in cultural terms. And looking back, it was a similar thing. They hadn't beaten Australia in 18 years. It was a young team. What happened afterwards was sort of crazy. The open tour bus, like almost mass hysteria. And in my mind, it was an amazing tournament. It was the best sport I think I ever saw as a child. But looking back, you think, was it all kind of part of that noughties success? And didn't it got sort of bound up in a weird way with the years before the crash? If that's not a trite thing to say, it's like the total decadence and cultural optimism. I just felt so of its time. And you look back at the images, it's just like that was a real sort of moment. But I'm not sure it said a particularly brilliant story about kind of England anyway.
It was fun at the time. Again, it was fun at the time.
It was great. It was great fun. It was amazing. But you look back and think there was a lot, and it also heralded England as a proper professional, more professionalized team and all that. But so another point, which is I just like to touch on, is like that. I think another thing that is interesting about the present tournament is you are seeing the maturity of football in the social media age now, where it's come in, and these footballers are like Maradona in Naples in the 80s. They have it's like they've got their own mini Naples all around them. Fans who adore them, who hang on every word. They have to cultivate a social media profile. And look what happened to Maradona. It destroyed him just being in Naples, being in that environment.
Yeah.
The total, constant ramped up emotion, and every player has to deal with that now. And I think they're actually really dealing with it very admirably. And Gareth Southgate, has a.
I think that's what. Role. That's a very good point actually, because I suppose the '66 story is a complex one, but in terms, look at what happened to being Bobby Moore, and being really ultimately not quite set up to deal with. It was a different age, of course, not quite set up to deal with the level of worship and notoriety and fame. Obviously, is different now, but that sense of calmness that Southgate brings, you have the sense that is going to prevent, if they win, these players going off the rails. Which brings me to the question, the Scottish question, really, which is, and be honest here. So you support England as I do when they're not playing Scotland. Do you feel any fear about England actually winning this thing on Sunday? I can think of some Scots I know who wish England well, but operating on the 1966 basis, suspect that if they win, we'll never hear about anything. We'll hear about it for the next 30, 40 years, endlessly told as this great national story and myth. Are you worried about that?
I'm more worried. I don't know. Yeah, it's a really good question. So I feel conflicted about it, and I'm desperate for them to win, but
Yeah, same
you're
here.
right. The kind of the smugness of the kind of that's what I fear is it gets bound up with actually the sort of Borisonian, the sort of atmosphere around Boris, and that sort of smugness, and yeah, we've talked about it, the bread and circuses thing, and the kind of great summer. A theme that you talked about on this kind of video channel, and while our democracy is basically in a totally bad shape,
Yeah,
it's also bound up. I think that's my fear, is where a lot of it is now bound up with the kind of unlocking process, and you can see it break down in Scotland. They're not unlocking for quite a while afterwards. They'll probably more basic measures. Is there a danger that kind of English stridency, because a lot of the national question plays out in these kind of cultural things, because Scots are understandably sensitive. They're a tiny country next to a massive one. There's always going to be sensitivity. I wonder whether that stridency,
that's a risk.
Kind of another fork in the road.
That's a risk. I mean, I have to say, I don't really have. I think you're right. There could be kind of longer term political tension there, though. England is so often just kind of over. It is the biggest part of the union, but it's so often overlooked, or politicians are scared of the idea of England. I actually think it's, well, not only do I just want them to win because they're a fantastic group of players with a terrific manager. I think it's, as I said earlier, I think it's really important, because I think it would be, if we plunged back into the sort of myth of tragedy and disaster, I just think it's a hoodoo or some sort of jinx that England just really have to get over. I think it'd be immensely positive if they do. So as a Scot, I'm willing them on to win. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, it's really straightforward. Just hit the subscribe button below for more of these videos. If you don't subscribe to Reaction on our main site, details are below as well, and you can get a 30-day free trial. You get my newsletter, you get Alastair's column, you get lots of other columnists like Tim Marshall and Adam Bolton, weekend section, lots of brilliant writing helping explain the news, politics, culture, and economics from the Reaction team. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us.